Welcome to Living a Life by Design. It's the journey back to you and living 365 days of purpose with your host, Esther Graham. Did you know your accountability and possibility is by design? God designed a phenomenal life for you, gave you the gift of choice. Esther helps empower you to discover and pursue the purpose that is already in you. Are you ready to look at yourself and see your future? Then get back to what is really important in life and get in alignment with your true self. Stay tuned to Living a Life by Design. Journey back to you and start living 365 days of purpose with your host, Esther Graham. It all starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Living a Life by Design. I'm so super excited that you're here. I'm Dr. Esther Graham, and thank you for taking the time to join me today. I have a very special guest today, Carmen, and I'm going to pronounce her name, and when she pops on, she'll correct me. Carmen Cauthen. I believe I said that correctly. Yeah, she's giving the thumbs up. I'm excited to have Carmen. Carmen is the founder of Research and Resource. She's a native of Raleigh, North Carolina. Has been there for several years. She graduated from North Carolina State with a degree in poli-sci and has worked in the House of Representatives for over 20 years. Listen, here are some things I know about Carmen, that if you're in Raleigh and you go to the main library, I believe it's downtown Raleigh, that you're going to see Carmen's great big picture on one of the large windows in Raleigh. And why is that? It's because she's a community advocate. She works with families. She's very much wants you to find out your family history. She teaches about systemic racism, especially to white people, so she can help them recognize how they can be true allies in, especially this is important in how we're moving forward in society and humanity as a whole. She's a historian. She's a copy editor. She's an excellent proofreader. And how do I know that? Is because I've talked to someone who said, oh, Carmen proofed this, Tiffany, Carmen proofreads everything I do, even if I don't ask her to. What I also know about Carmen, as we've been in rooms together, is the powerful conversation and the beautiful personality that she has. I just love listening to her talk. She's recently did a podcast where, and I'll have her tell you the title of the podcast, where she's talking about her journey and what she's doing and how she's helping society. Listen, she's a force to be reckoned with and a very popular person in North Carolina. So let's welcome everyone. Let's show her some love to Carmen, and let's get started with our conversation. Hey, Carmen, come on and just tell us, how are you? How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And so I'm excited to share with my audience you and exactly what you do, what your story is. And so let's just start there. Tell us a little bit first about what you do. I did not give your bio justice. So please talk about what you're doing, because there's so much. I was reading, I said, okay, there's so much. I'm going to highlight some pieces. So tell us about what you do and give us a little background about you and your story and what has brought you to why you're so passionate. Because you're really passionate about what you do. So let's talk.
So the easiest thing for me to say is I'm retired. And then, because that was a journey, just getting to that space.
Yeah.
So I'd love to be able to say that. But I also understand when people say, I'm busier in retirement than I ever was when I worked. And so I'll tell you a little bit of my story, how I got to retirement. So I grew up as the daughter of a pharmacist and an educator. One grandfather was also a pharmacist, and both my grandfather and my father had drugstores here in Raleigh. My mom's family was forced to sell land to the railroad back in the 1800s to create a town that they grew up in. And so I really come from a very middle class background. And my mother was one of the first teachers to desegregate the school system here. And in doing that, she saw houses for sale in the neighborhoods that were the white neighborhoods. And the houses were bigger than what she saw in the black neighborhoods, more reminiscent of the houses that were in 2 or 3 neighborhoods here that were full. And so they began a journey of looking for a house in one of these neighborhoods. And we ended up moving into a white neighborhood when I was 10 in 1969, which is a year after the Fair Housing Act passed. So you can imagine that there were not any other Black people in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I happened to be the only girl, not just the only Black girl, but the only girl. And so I couldn't understand why we had moved to that neighborhood. So I asked my mom at 10, why did we move here? And she said, we would have had to buy 2 lots to build the kind of house we wanted in Southeast Raleigh. Well, at 10, you just want to play. So that didn't make any sense. But I found myself, even though I'm very much an extrovert, kind of alone, and didn't really realize until I was in my 60s how alone I had been. I didn't ever feel like I fitted in with the Black kids or the white kids all going through school. I was an avid reader anyway.
Yeah.
And so I realized that I read every biography that there was in the school library. And family was very important. My mother came from a big family. My father's family was here. So we spent a lot of time with family. And I would overhear all these stories that were just fascinating to me. And so I ended up becoming kind of the family historian as the elders died out. And with my gray hair now, I am a baby elder. That's as much as I'm admitting to. And so when I graduated,
Beautiful. Your gray hair is beautiful.
thank you. When I graduated from college, it took me 9 years because I had an internship at the North Carolina General Assembly in the House of Representatives in the Speaker's office the summer of my freshman year. And I fell in love. I just thought that was the most wonderful place. Of course, at that time, there were only 3 Black House members out of 120. And I got a job on the Sergeant at Arms staff in 1981. And just so happens that I had to have the blessing of the gentleman who would become the first and only Black Speaker of the House about 15 years later. And I moved up from opening the doors to running the voting equipment to eventually, after graduation, which took 9 years because whenever they were in session, I would take off. I would take off from school and go back to work. So I became a permanent staff person and started writing the journal for the House. And I did that for 20 some years until I retired.
Wow.
So.
Let's go back because I've heard you talk about this before, about when you moved into the white neighborhood, and it's something you said, and I could definitely identify with this 100%. You said you were Black, you're the only Black family in the white neighborhood, and then you didn't fit in. You didn't fit in with Black people, especially when you went out to school, and you didn't fit in with the white people either. Talk a little bit about that. And I say that because, I'm not originally from the United States. And so when we moved to the US with my parents, when we lived, we were the only Blacks in a white neighborhood. And in everywhere I grew up, it was the same thing. I didn't fit in with the Black people, and I didn't fit in with the whites as well. So one of the reasons why with Black people, I guess, I wasn't Black enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then with white people, I wasn't white. So,
Exactly.
and that's hard as a child. Oh, let me tell you, that really is traumatizing. And really, you have to fight to just know who you are as a person. So let's just briefly talk about how was that for you?
That was just really, it was hard for me, but I didn't know to tell my parents how hard it
Yeah,
was. You know,
me
when
too.
you're a
Yeah.
kid, we don't think of, we know we are struggling with something, but we don't really know what it is.
Oh, no. Yeah.
And it wasn't that I didn't have friends, some of whom I'm still friends with
Me
today.
too. Me too. Yeah.
But it's just in the last few years I'm really realizing the differences. Like they would come to my house, or they would be invited, could be invited to my house, but I'm just realizing in my 60s that I didn't get invited to their houses. And I'm just thinking, as long as we were together, it was okay. We were at school together. I if somebody called me a name, it wasn't somebody I went to school with. It might be somebody that I'm walking home, and
Yes.
somebody says something on the street when I'm walking home.
Yeah.
But I will tell this really quickly. When the first day we moved in, there had been a rumor in the community that there was a Black family moving in and property values were going to drop. And the Black family had 8 kids, and it's just me and my brother. And so my mother had a station wagon, and she picked up all 6 of my cousins and put them in the car the day we moved in. So
Yeah.
8 kids piled out of the station wagon to make the rumor be true. But it was just us. And that's the woman that I grew up with. So that tells you kind of where some of my feisty comes from. It's a quiet feisty, but it's there.
I can just imagine everybody's face as they're looking at the station wagon and all these little kids
Exactly. Exactly.
rolled out the car. You know what I mean? What's funny with that is like with us, we all had accents, so nobody could understand us.
Oh, yes. Yes. That would be a whole different
Yeah. It-
addition
it-
to that.
Oh yeah, but it's just really interesting. We're about to take a break, but it was just really interesting, when you just said that, it's like, yeah, I could really identify with that and the difficulty in you finding yourself. But then it's exactly that puts you on the journey that you're on right now, those experiences, right? So we'll
Yes.
talk about that a little bit because I really want to get into what you're doing now and just everything because I know it's just so powerful. So we're going to go on a quick break and we'll be right back with Carmen. Welcome back, everyone, to Living a Life by Design. I'm so glad you're here. We're going to continue our conversation with Carmen. And so, Carmen, let's just talk about that journey and what you're doing now, because you're doing powerful things. And I want people to know what you're doing and how you're really building not just individuals, but communities. And I do want to talk a little bit about as how you're working as you said here, you've taught systemic racism and how you help white people to really align, and how did you get to even doing that? Is it from your experience that you've had? You're in North Carolina, and so let's dive deep into that because this is going to help someone, especially in the times that we're living in right now. That's
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
on both sides, for Black people, for white people, Latinos, if you're from the East, I was going to say the East Coast, but the Middle East, just everyone,
Right.
because
Right.
America is such a melting pot, but yet we seem to struggle more than everybody else.
Well, you said a statement that I do not agree with.
Okay,
We
tell
are
me.
not a melting pot.
Okay, great.
When we melt, we all become the same thing. If you melt
That's
some
good.
crayons, they
Love
all
it.
become the
You're a
same
salad?
one thing. And I'm not losing who I am. I'm not losing who
That's
my
great.
people
I
are.
like that. Thank you for that.
And I think that's part of America's issue.
Yeah.
Is we Americans back at the beginning made a decision that you couldn't be Irish American, you couldn't be Spanish American, you
Yeah.
couldn't be Dutch American, you had to be American. That was the only thing that counted. So people pushed aside who they were, especially if their skin was pink. And it was in order to fit in. Well, I can't do that. I'm not ever going to lose my skin color. I don't want to. And my goodness, how many of you go to the beach and try to get my skin color? That used to be a conversation in school. Kids would come back in September and they go, look, I'm almost as brown as you are. But they weren't. They were still white, which is
Yeah.
a made up term.
Yeah.
And so I see that as so many of us ignoring who we are, who our family was, where we came from. And, you know, during the break, you said something about when you came home and you went in the house, you went back to your real country.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
when you consider Scandinavians go in their house and they may not talk the language, but they certainly have the flavor in terms of the furniture they like and the way they cook and
Yeah.
those things. So why do you lose those things when you go outside of your door? And so we don't do that. And part of how I grew up was really relating to family and relating to history. And that has just been so important. I was always teaching something about Black people. You know, when you have to go to school and you have to do a report,
Yeah.
we had a little book, a brown book in our library that I wore out. It's called Negro Makers of History. I did not have any clue of its value
Yeah.
until 3 years ago. Um, Carter G. Woodson wrote this book, and it's a first edition. And if you don't know, he is the father of Black History Week, which is now Black History Month.
Yeah.
And he wrote this book in 1927. My father's sister, my aunt, won this book at the Black Library here. And it's inscribed by the mayor because she won it in a reading program. And it's like the back is falling off, and the paper is turning brown, but it tells all this Black history that we didn't learn in school. I have just recently started digging into the Revolutionary War. I had heard that Crispus Attucks was the first person to die in the Revolutionary War, and he was Black. I had no idea that there were Black people from all over the Eastern Seaboard who fought in the Revolutionary War, who were paid by being given land. That was the way they paid folks. And I want everybody to know this history. I
Yeah.
want our
Yeah.
children to know it because too often they hear that they didn't come from anything, their
Mhm.
people didn't do anything, and it's a lie. It's not true. And
Yeah.
so I don't care about these titles like critical race theory. I don't care about any of that. What's important to me is we tell the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that should endear itself to everybody because we all want the truth. It
Yeah.
might be the truth that we think of, but I'm going back and finding the facts to prove the truth of what we have learned. And because for some reason, white people tell me that that they can relate and hear what I have to say.
Good.
So if that's a gift that I have, then I have to use that to
Yeah.
help them understand who people who look like me are.
Yeah.
And I know I was fortunate to be able to grow up in a middle class Black family during the 60s. I know that. But it didn't make me better than anybody else.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
that was one of the challenges I had with a lot of the Black students who were bused into my community. I would be walking to school, middle school, with a violin, which was odd in the 60s, but that was in fourth grade. The teacher said anybody who wants to play an instrument gets to leave class and go downstairs. I didn't even know what an instrument was, but if everybody was going to leave class and go downstairs, I was going too because I have FOMO. I didn't want to miss nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I went down there and I came home and I told my parents I wanted to play violin, and they just kind of looked at me. And so Daddy rented one until he realized I was serious. And so here I am walking to school with this instrument, and all the rest of the Black kids are being bussed into the school. And most of them lived in the housing community. A good number of them did. And my dad had a drugstore, and I had this white accent. So I remember answering one of those original machines that took messages, like now you just record it on the phone. But we used to have this machine in the drugstore that was about the size of a book.
Now, I have to tell you, you're gonna have to describe that, because if any millennials are listening, they're like, "What is that?"
They
So,
don't have a clue. So it was the size, like 8.5 by 11, and maybe 4 inches thick. And you'd have to press a button and record the message, and then you have to go back and listen to the message and make sure it was good. And it would play at night. He would cut it on, and it would play if somebody called during the evening or when he was closed, to get a refill on a prescription. And so when I was down there, it was always my excitement to be able to take the messages off of the machine. So one morning, I cut the machine on, and I'm writing this message down about this prescription refill. And the girl says, "Mama, who's that white girl Doc's got answering the phone?" Because I had recorded the message too. And I was like, why does she think I'm white? I sound like everybody else. And so, it's those little things. And then I used to think, well, why doesn't anybody invite me to their birthday parties? Not just the white kids, but the Black ones. And then I realized, when you're that age, you can only go where your parents take you. So if your parents don't have time to take you, you can't go. So I was very much felt alone, and really didn't start to explore that stuff until I was in my 50s. Because I'm just, moving on through life and taking care of children and taking care of parents and doing that kind of stuff.
I remember I struggled a lot with acceptance, because I just wasn't always accepted. Now, in going, all through high school, I think at my high school was maybe five Black people. I don't even know. But and of course I've got my two best friends that are white, and so we would always, we would hang out. I wouldn't go to one parent's house I would go to all the time, and the other one just every once in a while. But it was always, it's just always really different. One of the things, but to this day, I'm very close friends. They're wonderful, and I'm very close friends with them. But there were some things, and I'm sure even with them, we realized now back then, I could remember conversations, and I could remember, like, if I would go out with them, or like, you go to the like a high school party or whatever, and I would be the only one, and I would be very careful of conversations I'm hearing, because sometimes they would forget that
you were there.
there.
Yes.
And then I remember one of my friends saying, "Well, Esther, you're not like the rest of them." And I'm like, "The rest of who? I'm not like. Who
Exactly.
am I not like?" And so
Exactly.
conversations like that. So I remember you said something about pink. I remember when we lived in Europe, we lived in Italy for quite a while, and my husband and I, we sent our children to the Italian schools, right? And I remember at a Christmas function that we were having, and we showed up. They were doing where they're coloring, and they're doing all these different things. And my daughter at the time picked up a pink crayon and said, "Mommy, when will I turn pink?" And that's when I said, "Okay, we've got to fix this," because they're the only ones in the Italian school as well, that her and her younger brother. My eldest son went to another school because he was older. And I had to say to her, and I looked and I said, and all the crayons are right there. So thank you for correcting the melting pot. I never looked at it that. No, that was great. Thank you, because that makes perfect sense. I looked at the crayons, and I took the pink crayon out of her hands, and I put the pink crayon down, because we were coloring Santas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's coloring their Santas pinks. And I said, why don't you color the Santa this color? I said, this is a beautiful color. This is the color of your skin, brown. I
Mhm.
said, and your skin is beautiful and it will always be beautiful. It will never change to pink. You don't need to be pink. They're pink and you're brown. And so color your Santa brown. And so from that point, I would bring in pictures of just that represented
Mhm.
our family.
Yes.
So much that one time I had a friend of mine and she's white. She came and she was offended. She said, Esther, why do you just have brown pictures on your walls? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, that's not normal. And I said, how is that not normal? And I said, how is that?
Ooh.
I said, that's normal. I said, what color pictures do you have on your wall? She said, well, I've got pictures of people. I said, yeah, and that's normal for you. I said, that's not normal for me. And she said, well, that offends me. I said, how is that? And so honestly, from that point, we were never, because it's like, you don't understand.
Mm-mm.
Why would I have, you understand what I mean?
I,
And so,
I get it.
yeah. But the blessing in all of that is one day, as my daughter was in residency in med school, she had a roommate from another country, from India, who said to her, how are you so confident as a Black woman? She said, and her Indian friend was this, they were the same complexion. Maybe Jaleesa was maybe a tinge darker. And she said, she said, I'm so discriminated against because the color of my skin, even in India, and by the way, the research on that is just phenomenal. And my daughter said to her, she said, my mom always taught me to be very proud that and she began to explain to her, and her friend said, wow, that's just so good. So, and she said, feel confident in who you are because and the color of your skin. But it's amazing the things that we have to go through. And so the good part about that is that, and everyone, we're headed to a break. That it's so important that we know who we are and
And
what we represent. So we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back with this powerful conversation with Carmen. Hey everyone, welcome back to Living a Life by Design with me, your host, Dr. Esther Graham, and my very special guest, Carmen Cauthen. Did I say that right,
Cauthen.
Carmen?
You said it
Cauthen.
right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So we're talking about just a little bit about systemic racism, or just where we are. I think this is such a good conversation, and we need to talk the truth about this conversation so we could all be helped. So when I left, before we went to a commercial break, I was speaking about my daughter and her experience, and over the break, I said, what's powerful about all of this is that here she is now. She stands as a powerful Black woman, knowing who she is. Our sons, they stand as powerful Black men, knowing who they are, and yet also not discriminated against anybody else. They know who they are now, living in America as Black people.
Exactly.
They know who they are, and yet they don't discriminate against anyone else that looks different, acts different, speaks different, even believes different.
Yes. And we all need to teach that.
Yeah.
Everybody needs to be teaching that to their young people.
Yeah. Yeah.
This country was not founded to ignore the fact that other people existed, although that is how we did it. But when you read the words that were written to found this country, the words and the actions are completely different.
Yeah.
And so it is part of our job and our duty, whether we want to do it or not, to continue to say that, to continue to make sure that other people who don't look like us, who have been in the majority but are rapidly becoming the minority in terms of color of their skin, that they understand that they are not the end all be all, and that there is room for everybody in this spectrum. And so sometimes it means you have to challenge something that someone says, or challenge something that someone does. You don't have to do it in an angry manner, even if you are angry, because sometimes the anger doesn't allow people who don't look like us to hear what we have to say.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things I loved about that story about my mom. And she would find quiet ways to do things. And of course, she was a woman who was raised in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so it was a different way of raising and being, because you didn't have as much freedom to do as we do today. You know, she could have said the wrong thing in anger and ended up in jail or dead when she was growing up. And maybe I do have some concern about that going forward, but I have been fortunate enough to be able to speak what I have to say, and people will hear it or not, but they respect who I am enough to listen to me.
Amen. And that's really what it should be about, because we do need to hear the truth. And I've heard you speak on it just when we were in Phoenix, just in the last time, in a room of people of various cultures, or let's say even skin color, and everyone was sitting and engaged in what you were saying. And it wasn't even, you were just talking, like we were just having conversations like now. And I think that's just so, important. I think about, my husband is from Savannah, Georgia. He's Black, he's American, and I'm Black, I'm not American. The cultures coming together. I think about, it's just like you said. I remember one time before I met his family, I called and his brother said, "Hey, some white girl wants to talk to you on the phone." I was mad. I said, "Can you tell him I am white?"
Yes.
Yeah, and what I love though is that while I stand in who I am as a Black woman, I have learned to embrace, with a different culture. I've learned to embrace uh, Black, the Black culture in America, right? I've learned to embrace that as even a part, it's so rich. It's so rich. And I've learned,
All of our cultures are rich.
I was just about to get that. And I've learned that everyone's culture is rich. And when we come together, it adds so much value
Exactly.
to the lives that we're living. If I could just see you as the person you are and value what you bring to the table and your culture and your perspective and all of that, and not judge you, but just and say, "Oh yeah, well, I don't understand that. I don't even know if I agree with that, but let's talk some more." So, that doesn't mean that we can't work together.
Right. And that's part of what I do when I'm encouraging people to write their family history.
Yeah.
Because what I have come to recognize is that America's history has been written by people who could read and write, and people who were doing that to make sure that their economic status was taken care of. And that was white men.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so everybody else, Black people, white people who were poor, who didn't have money, don't have money, women, Native Americans, people who have come to this country from other countries, everybody else needs to write their history down, because we tend to be taught and to teach in our schools, regardless of what school it is, whether it's public, private, or otherwise, what white men said was the truth. And they only write from their perspective. And everything ties back to the money. Every system that has been created in America ties to the money. Our school system, our judicial system, our housing systems. And housing is where I come from. As a housing advocate, as an affordable housing advocate, I recognized when I was researching Black history in Raleigh that after the Civil War, land was divided, because that was all the white people had left after the Civil War was land. And real estate developers, they would sell it and they were divided into small, tiny, narrow lots in the areas that the white people didn't want to live in, and leased that land to people who had been formerly enslaved.
Mhm.
And when you look in the neighborhoods that we consider where Black people or poor people live today, that's that same land. It's the land that white people didn't want to live in. It's the land that was damp. It's the land that was downhill. It's the land that was close to the cemetery where it smelled bad. And so the economic injustice comes from that. Environmental injustice comes from that. People ended up living there, and after during Reconstruction, you could live wherever you could afford to live. But by time of Jim Crow, by 1900, there were laws that said if you were Black, you couldn't move out of those areas, and those areas had been annexed to
Right.
cities. So think about that. It didn't matter how much money you were able to make.
Wow.
If you couldn't move, then you concentrate a group of people in a certain spot. And you concentrated them in places where you didn't want to live. Does that sound like today? It does. And it's all based on money.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. I mean, so I guess the next question I want to ask is how do we even fix this? How do we move forward? What do we do? Because people are listening, and I'm sure they're probably saying, so Carmen, since we know this is the problem, what is the issue in America? Why is it that other countries may not have the same type, but we seem to have so many issues in this area? How can we move forward? What can we do? That's it. How can we move forward? What can we do? We'll be right back, everyone. And Carmen's going to talk to us about that. Welcome back, everyone. Let's continue our conversation with Carmen. So let's talk about what's going on. The right side of the track, the wrong side of the track. You're Black, white, blue, green, yellow. What's the problem?
So part of the problem is if we don't recognize that there were systems created to do certain things, to hold people back who didn't have money. And in a lot of cases, it didn't really matter what the color of their skin was. It was just to keep the economic classes separate. So one of the things we have to recognize is there really is a caste system in America.
Yes, there is.
And I think personally that it's even worse if you are Black because of the degrees of skin coloration. But not only that, everything is about the money. So the systems were created to keep people down and to keep people who had money from being in competition with everybody. So when you were saying something during the break about the wrong and the right side of the track, when the railroads were built through America, just like when our interstate highway system was built in America, they bought or I don't want to say stole, but they used the law of eminent domain, which is like stealing, to take the land of the people who didn't have the protection of white skin color and money. And so the railroad tracks divide towns by one side is where people who have money live, one side is where people who don't have money. And generally that divides by race as well. The highway system throughout our country was built on the principle of urban renewal, which was a WPA, Works Progress Administration strategy started during the Depression by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in order to get people back to work. And so money was given to localities, to states, to build these transportation systems that have become the interstate that goes from one side of the country to the other. And the land that was always taken was on the side of town where people were poor, because they generally didn't own that land, and it wasn't disrupting white people's way of living. And so you have the right and the wrong side of the track, the right and the wrong side of the highway system. You can look at it in every economic layer that you want to. You look, when I'm doing a presentation, I show people what the ABC store looks like on my side of town, because in the state of North Carolina, the state controls the liquor sales. So the ABC store up the street from my house, I live in a Black neighborhood today. You go in and you tell them at the window what you want. The ABC store in the neighborhood that I lived in for 30 years was a predominantly surrounded by a predominantly white community. When you go in that ABC store, it looks like a department store. It's well lit. You can walk the aisles. You can pick out what you want. And you don't have to go to a window and say, I want that. It's the same thing when you're driving on the highway. When you're driving on one of the interstates, look at the boundaries, the behind the houses. Look at what they're made out of. In some communities, there is no wall to block off the sound of the highway. Those are going to be primarily Black and brown communities. If there is a wall, it might be concrete. On the other side of town, it's going to be brick, or it's going to be stamped to look like brick. It's these things that we don't recognize are tellers. When you're driving, look and see where the warehouses are. The warehouses are not where the white people live. And so the systems have to be changed. Zoning systems were created to keep people apart. Every town didn't have a redlining map. We hear about redlining. Raleigh was too small to have a redlining map, but you can best believe that the bankers, the people who were giving the mortgages, knew what neighborhoods not to give mortgages in, because those were the neighborhoods that they considered to be less able to repay their loans, which has been proven to be not true. So it's all about the money, and we can't keep patching these systems. And that's what we do. We put a little patch here. We put a little patch here on the education system. We need to go dig that stuff back up. It was illegal to teach Black people how to read and write. It was illegal. And so when slavery ended, all of a sudden schools were in the South they were crazy. They built these schools. Missionaries came to build colleges and elementary schools, and the schools would be full during the day of students, and at night they would be full of adults. We knew that education and buying land were the ways to get out of the places that we were. And now we have kind of corrupted those systems. And so people talk about our education system, and I don't think we really recognize that when we desegregated the schools. I know that this happened in Raleigh, North Carolina. The Black principals were told to take their best teachers and send them to the white schools. The white principals were asked to find out if their teachers were willing to be reassigned. Notice they did not send their best teachers to the Black schools. And so while we have been asking for things, we haven't always known how they were answered. They might have been answered, but our Black teachers would take care of our Black students and make sure they learned. And so, these are things that we have to go back and look at and determine how can we dig up at the root of the system and not keep just putting a little patch on it.
I think that's key to, as we're moving, for us to move forward. I guess the question is, how would we even begin? Because here we are, we have to start somewhere, even if it's small. And I know you do a lot of community work. How can you encourage a person or say to a person, wherever you are, in whatever town that you're living in whatever part of the United States, what can you do to start moving forward? Because you're speaking about Raleigh, which, and all of the history, but what you're speaking of happens all over the United
All over,
States,
all over.
all over. And I know in different parts, I'm sure there's community advocates, there's people, there's everything, but it's not just you, Carmen, who is a community advocate. All of us, Black, white, brown, blue, green, pink, whatever, have to come together and
Mhm.
start somewhere. How do we do that? How do we do that?
One of the things that I find really important is just having conversations. Um, and as I have a conversation with someone else and someone else has a conversation with someone else, well, let's bring us together. Let's bring our community folks together. Let's talk about it in the community first, and then let's get buy-in in the community to go to the people who make the decisions. And that's what used to happen during the civil rights movement, during Reconstruction, during earlier times. People would go to each other. The church was the place, and that has changed. And we can't blame it on the pandemic. That has kind of been the last space.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we met in churches because we didn't have anywhere else to meet. There were no hotels that would let you come in and rent a space. There were no libraries that would let you come in. So a lot of libraries would be used as a community space if the church wasn't. We have to start ignoring our own economic power and come together as just regular people. We all have the same wants and desires. I firmly believe that. We just have different ways of going about them. And so we have to start coalescing. We have to start, when I grew up at the end of the civil rights movement, but it took effort to finish your day of work and come home and go get dressed and go to a meeting to talk about what needed to be done for your community. But people were willing to do that. I think we're going to be forced to do that in the coming years because we have let that go. We have let that go to whoever we elected to represent us. And sometimes they don't represent us well. So we have got to go back to making our own voices heard and not leave it to the next person to do.
Yeah. So Carmen, tell everyone how, because you do a lot of training on this. And so I'd like for you to share, how can people connect with you and say, I need to hear more of this conversation. I'd like to talk to you. I'd like for you to come and talk to my community. How can we connect with you?
So the easiest way is to email me. I am, as I said, a baby elder, so I don't do texting like everybody else does so much. But my email address is Carmen, CARMEN, at researchandresource.com. RESEARCHANDRESOURCE.com. And I will respond. I am happy to come and talk. I am happy to do Zoom meetings because I believe that this is important for us going forward. We are going to have to make the difference in our world. And there are so many like-minded people who want to, and they feel in despair because they feel like their voices are not being heard. But sometimes it's because we're still afraid to stand up and say, and we still have a large number of people who think that it doesn't matter what they say. And so they stay quiet, but their voices matter. And so it's important when you hear another voice to encourage that voice to speak out.
Good. Such good advice. So everyone, as we close, thank you, Carmen, for such a powerful and a very needed conversation. As I think about living a life by design, part of that is integrating all of these different things into our lives. And, earlier I mentioned about a melting pot, and Carmen said, if we're a melting pot, then we lose our individualities because crayons melt together and they become one. And what's important, 100% agree, is that we keep our individuality. We have to know who we are so we can now go out and heal the world. But we can't do anything if we don't know who we are. And so when we're thinking about living a life by design, it's knowing how you're designing your life the way that you want it. Living as an individual, knowing who you are, accepting who you are as that person, and then being open enough to receive others so we can go out and help other people become their individual as well. When we become one, then we do lose our authenticity.
Yeah.
We lose our authenticity. And that's what we don't want to happen. We have to use our voice. And if you don't have a voice, or you do, but then find it.
We were created to be who we were.
We were created to be who we are every and single day. And this is it, y'all. We were also created for more. So wherever you are in your life right now, just know that you're created to be who you are. You're loved as who you are, and you were created to more. And let's get that more, whatever that more joy, more peace, more bringing people together, and even financially, the more to where we can move. Don't get stuck in your situation. Don't get stuck. Don't say this is the end all of everything. As we're looking at the climate in our world today, in America today, don't get stuck with it. Let's begin to look at how we can move forward and how we could help our community. Let's start within us first, and then stretching it out to our community to where we can begin to move forward. It is time. It is really time for us as a people to come together so we can move things forward. Right? So thank you, Carmen. Don't forget, everyone, to connect to me, subscribe to the YouTube page, email me, and look on the website, guys. And look, as you're looking on social media, you'll see Carmen's information. You'll see my information. Let's connect. Have a great week. Enjoy your holiday season. Make sure that you are celebrating who you are and celebrating your family. Get to know your family history. Let's keep moving forward. God bless. Take care.
You have been listening to Living a Life by Design, the journey back to you, and living 365 days of purpose with host Esther Graham. Listen or watch live every second and fourth Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific on TransformationTalkRadio.com. Discover that what is possible is already in you. God designed a phenomenal life for you. Esther helps you ignite that energy behind your personal journey for a deeper joy and peace, living 365 days of purpose. For more information on living a life by design, visit fddwomen.com.